Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. This is Chris. I'm here with Justin, and we are back for another week of heavy metal discussion. And this week we have chosen Stratovarius' 1995 release, Fourth Dimension. I think this is going to definitely bring up a lot of good discussion points. What do you think?
Yeah, this is one I knew we would get to. I think it's a really interesting choice, especially coming off of last week, where I don't think I hit a home run, at least for you, with my thrash metal choice. But just going back to last week for a second, we had a lot of positive feedback with Anthrax's Among the Living, and I thought I would, as a homework assignment, make you listen to Sound of White Noise, which was an album that came out about 6 years after Among the Living and has a really different feel for Anthrax. So I have a couple of things I want to get to, but before I do, did you get to listen to Sound of White Noise?
I did. I listened to it today, actually, and I mean, I don't know. I'm no Anthrax expert, but it was like listening to a different band. Having John Bush on vocals made such a difference to me because I enjoy his vocals so much, and just the production was crisper, and it was a little bit more melodic than Among the Living. I enjoyed it quite a bit more, and I'm glad that you suggested giving it a shot, so I don't have to throw the entire Anthrax discography into the trash after last week.
It's funny. I know it's not for everyone. I think the diehard thrash fans, and I don't think I'm a diehard, but I do enjoy the genre, and I'm actually going to mention a new thrash band I heard in a little bit. But there's something about that classic sound which I enjoy, but I agree that Sound of White Noise is definitely a more mature effort. Really, some of the songs don't even border on thrash. I think that even you had commented offline that one of the songs reminded you of something that Alice in Chains would do. So they really kind of dipped their toes into other pools with that release. And since then they've actually come back full circle as their newest releases, kind of back to that old thrashy style that the diehards are used to. But I think that this is more of a representative album that's more of like an Armored Saint or more of like a classic metal disc than it is just like a all-out thrash album. So I had a feeling you might like it. So I appreciate you taking a listen to that. But speaking of thrash, there's another band that I want to mention. I heard something this week that actually blew me away. There's a band out of South Africa called Mind Assault. They're a thrash metal band. They started in about 2004. They don't have many releases to their name, but earlier this month, they came out with an album called The Cult of Conflict. And it was a 12-track thrash metal album with superb production, which kind of lent itself right away. I kind of noted how the production I thought was just fantastic. The songs themselves are just really, really catchy, riff driven thrash with fantastic solos. And although the vocalist is pretty much doing death metals the whole time, it is really well done. And I highly recommend that to anyone that enjoys some good old fashioned thrash. And also, I think I'd be remiss not to mention the new Secret Sphere album. We've mentioned them before on the show, and I think that we probably should do a deep dive one of these days. But if you haven't heard Lifeblood yet, you are missing out. They hit a home run with this disc. And what's interesting to me is that they're kind of all over the map with the way they recorded it. And by that, I mean, you have some of those classic power metal sounds that they used to be famous for, back in the early 2000s. And then a lot of other tracks that are more of like melodic metal, almost like, typical Frontier stuff in a way. So every song is a little bit different than the last, but somehow it all works. And Roberto Messina's vocals, which I always loved, they're better than ever. So I really, really can't recommend this album enough. And I think it's going to find its way pretty high on my top 50 list when the year is all said and done.
Yeah, it's definitely on my to listen to list. I definitely heard a couple of the singles that were released in advance of the album, and I enjoyed them quite a bit. So this is their first album that they made since Michel Lupi left the band as their vocalist, and they brought back Roberto to take his place back in the band. He had sung on every Secret Sphere album up until Lupi replaced him. I think Lupi sang with them for 2 albums, and then now he's back. So
Yeah, it's amazing how things come full circle, and this disc is just like I said, it's a real testament to kind of Aldo's songwriting, who's obviously got his hands in a lot of different projects, but also like I said, just different genres that they kind of seamlessly blend together. It's really a really solid disc, and I highly recommend that. Did anything catch your ear this week?
actually, speaking of Italian bands, I got to finally listen to Temperance's new album, Melodies of Green and Blue, which is an all acoustic album. They recorded 2 new songs and 6 acoustic versions of songs from their most recent full length album, Viridian, and I got to listen to it today. I enjoyed it a lot. It was just kind of a mellow listen, which fit well. It was kind of a dreary day here weather-wise, so kind of fit the mood. Just real good stuff, and I really enjoyed the different renditions of the songs that I came to really enjoy. The Viridian album was, I believe, it was on both of our lists for best of 2020. So there's some good, you know, acoustic versions of songs from that, and the 2 new songs are quite good as well. So
Yeah, they do a nice job with the arrangements on this. I had listened to it. It didn't grab me a ton when I first heard it, but I actually listened to it again today on your recommendation, and I enjoyed it a lot more the second time through. So props to that.
yes, I really enjoyed the acoustic version of "Start Another Round" because it's such a an upbeat song, the original, and the acoustic version of it is kind of a fun upbeat acoustic version of it. So I definitely recommend giving that a listen, especially if you're into acoustic style music.
Nice. And with that, let's get to the headliner for the day, Stratovarius's Fourth Dimension, which was your recommendation for a lot of reasons, I'm sure. So I might as well dive right in. Why don't you tell everyone this wasn't the first Stratovarius disc you heard, or was it?
It's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly which one I heard start to finish. It was either this or Visions, and I can't remember which. I always go back to that first mixtape that our friend Ralph made for me that kind of started this whole journey for me. And on that mixtape there was 1 song from Visions and 1 song from Fourth Dimension, and it was Black Diamond from Visions and Distant Skies from Fourth Dimension. So naturally I ended up with a Sophie's Choice situation. Figure, what's going to be my first Stratovarius album based on one of those 2 songs. And I want to, it was probably very close to one another, and same with Episode. I don't think Destiny had been released, so
No, it definitely hadn't.
So those 3 albums were the ones that I was looking to grab onto right away before diving back into the earlier albums, which we'll talk about. And there was nothing beyond Visions at the time. I might have, this might have been one of those things where I went to the wall at the Lake Success Shopping Center and printed out, looked it up on the computer, printed it out, and handed it to the cashier, and they would order you the disc. So long as it was available domestically, they would order the disc. And I guess Noise Records had put out some of Stratovarius's albums. So I don't remember if I had Visions or not yet, but I almost want to say Visions was the first one that I had, and then I got Fourth Dimension, but I was super stoked to get this album. And I think I had borrowed Ralph's copy of the CD also at some point. So I was familiar with, Against the Wind, and I do have a story I'll go into later on about what made me decide that I had to get this album, which was actually a trip that involved our friend Mike Crea, the White Shadow World Warrior 1000. I don't know. There's too many nicknames to name, but Mike Venus. I just remember just like those two songs, like of all those bands that were on that mixtape, like Stratovarius was one of the ones that really stood
Jumped
out
out.
just
Yeah,
because of how like virtuoistic. I don't know what the word virtuosity, destrucity. I don't know the word exactly, but um, just that neoclassical style mixed with the power metal. I mean, like hearing that song, just I remember hearing Black Diamond for the first time and just being completely floored. And so the reason I chose this was because, first of all, it the band had posted to social media last week, just shining a light on the fact that it was released 26 years ago. But I thought it was a good choice for our first Stratovarius album, just because I feel like it represented an important kind of turning point in the band's history. And so, I mean, as much as, and I'm sure we will talk about, classic albums like Episode and Visions and Destiny and whatever else. I thought this one was a really interesting choice just because of the point in history the band was at that point.
yeah, I totally agree. I just want to just give a little background as to how I first kind of heard the band. There were certain points in my life where I heard certain music and it had like a profound impact on me. I remember the first time I heard Guns N' Roses was in around 1990, and I was in my friend's dad's car. I was all of 7 or 8 years old, and he was playing Appetite for Destruction. And I remember listening to some of the bigger hits from that album, the Welcome to the Jungle, the Paradise City, the Sweet Child of Mine. And I remember as a little kid thinking to myself, I don't know what this is, and I don't even know how to get my hands on whatever this is, but I love it. And that to me was like one of the first, probably seminal moments for me when it came to music. About 4 years later, I think about 1994, I was in my friend's uncle's car, and he was a little bit of an older guy, and he had played for me Iron Man by Black Sabbath. He was a big Black Sabbath fan. And again, at the time, I had no idea what it was. I mean, the album had come out 20 years prior, but I heard Iron Man and I'm like, I don't know what this is, but I have to hear more of it. And there was this pattern where I would hear these things. And eventually, obviously, as I got older, I kind of figured out what these things are. The third moment to me was when we were in our friend's Ryan's room and he all of a sudden starts playing Black Diamond while the album is playing in the background. And I was absolutely blown away. And that really just shaped my taste for the next, 23 years. And even to this day, Black Diamond, the song, is what I credit for helping me get into this genre. And I'm just happy that I get to talk about it now because that album, I should say that song was really like a gateway drug for me. They talk about certain drugs being gateway drugs. Black Diamond was my gateway drug into power metal and even progressive metal. So I'm glad we're going there. But to your point, Fourth Dimension represents a real turning point for the band because this was their fourth album. Not surprisingly, but the first three have such a different feel for it. Not only because Timo Tolkki is singing as opposed to Timo Coltepelto, but it was really just because the way that they were writing songs or the way that Timo wrote his songs, they were very, very different than what would ultimately become Fourth Dimension and basically every album that followed.
Yeah, it was definitely more of like a straight power metal kind of sound. And I think that with Fourth Dimension, it was kind of like Timo Tolkki wanting to go in a more classical, neoclassical style direction, which, I mean, a song like Twilight Symphony, you could definitely hear
Sure.
that's where they're headed. I think I read somewhere that was the first Stradivarius song to have like a real orchestra playing in it, which I thought was interesting. And that would go on to be just like a signature part of their sound. But at the time, if you go back and you listen to albums like Twilight Time or Dream Space, it's more just kind of just straight up like, European power metal, really good stuff, but not quite at that kind of symphonic way that they would go. And I mean, obviously, the fact that Timo Tolkki give up the reins as a vocalist to another Timo Cotapelto. Um, that I think turned out to be such a brilliant move. As much as I enjoy Timo Tolkki's vocals, I mean, it's almost kind of like comparing when Michael Kiske replaced Kai Hansen in Halloween, where Timo Tolkki's vocals were fine, but I mean Timo Cotapelto was just an incredible breath of fresh air as the replacement. I mean, he fit in perfectly, and it also gave Timo Tolkki, much like it gave Kai Hansen, a chance to just focus on playing his guitar and writing tracks. And I think it was the right move, for Timo Tolkki to not have so much on his plate and to give it the job to somebody who I think was a much more classically trained vocalist and somebody who sounded a lot more, I don't know if professional would be the word, but just a lot more smooth, I would say.
Yeah, he much more powerful vocalist. And honestly, Tolkki, I think, gets a little bit of a bad rap. I don't think his vocals were bad by any means. I just don't think they were very special. I think there's some excellent tracks on those first three discs. But I think that they kind of get lost because Tolkki is a little vanilla, if you will. It's almost like, when we spoke about Iron Maiden, we were talking about, when Bruce Dickinson took over, it was just like putting the band in a whole new stratosphere, no pun intended, just because of his vocal abilities on top of music that kind of was already heard on Killers. Like I said, when you hear him sing the Killers tracks, you realize how awesome a vocalist he is. And that's no slight against, what came before, obviously, same here, but you see how the progression really just took them to the next level. And I think that if Cotapelto hadn't joined the band, I don't think that they would have reached the heights that they ever reached. But the way that the tracks on this album are constructed, it's really in the same vein as the first three discs. Better, obviously better production, and obviously a little bit more keyboard heavy. But for the most part, the songs really sound like the old tracks. So much so that there's a whole slew of demos, which I think you had sent me probably about a year or two ago, that from this album where you can actually hear Tolkki sing a whole bunch of tracks from this album. And although the production on those demos is a little shoddy to say the least, you really get a feel for him singing songs like Against the Wind and Galaxies and Twilight Symphony. It's really, really interesting stuff, and it kind of just shows you that added element that Cotapelto brought to the band on the actual album.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like musically, I feel like Dream Space, which was the album that preceded this one, almost kind of went in a more traditional heavy metal sort of way. Whereas when you go back to their second album, Twilight Time, there's songs like Out of the Shadows and The Hands of Time, which are like these just like really very like these power metal anthems. There's just like, I feel like maybe on Dream Space they didn't do that quite as much. Maybe Wings of Tomorrow might have been one and Hold On to Your Dream, but that album had 14 tracks on it, and a lot of them were kind of like a little bit mid tempo, like the title track itself, Dream Space. And I feel like the band with songs like Distant Skies and We Hold the Key and Twilight Symphony and Against the Wind, they went back to like these real banger type tracks, these just power metal, like anthemic songs. And I just, when I first heard Distant Skies, that song like hit me like a ton of bricks. And the other tracks that I just mentioned, I think are right up there with that. And I think that, and I can't tell if the production is that much better or it just sounds so much better with Cotapelto at the helm instead of Tolkki, just because of his vocals are just so much cleaner. But I just think overall, this is just is a better sounding album than the previous output.
Yeah, I agree. I think of the first three, Twilight Time was always my favorite disc of the first trilogy, if you will. I think that this album sonically does sound markedly better But I think that by the time they got to Episode, and certainly by the time they got to Visions, they had perfected their sound, and it's kind of the sound that they have really ever since, in terms of just the quality of the sound. Like we said, this is a transitional album in many ways, and as I went back to it, for some reason in my head, even though I've listened to this album countless times, I always kind of assumed it was a 4-song album. And by that, I mean, there were some good tracks throughout, but Against the Wind, Distant Skies, Galaxies, the first 3 tracks, and then the last full track, Twilight Symphony, kind of bookended this album for me, at least my memory of it from like the last time I heard it, which was before 2010 easily, just because I haven't played it straight through. What struck out, or really stuck out to me this time around, was that there's some really fantastic songs in the middle of this disc, which I completely ignored, or I should say just never really struck a chord with me years ago. And I just want to point out 3 in particular. The instrumental Stratovarius, the self-titled track, unbelievable instrumental song that I had just never paid attention to. Lord of the Wasteland, which might be one of their most underrated tracks ever. I don't even know if they've ever touched the thing live. And the track that I think I'll even make it my track of the week, because I just absolutely couldn't believe how phenomenal this song was this time around. We Hold the Key. That to me is maybe one of their best songs ever made, and I don't even think I realized it until now, which is probably my millionth and one listen to the album.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I'm not even, I don't think I've yet to pick the song of the week, because this album is so strong. But We Hold the Key was one of the ones I was definitely thinking about, because and maybe like you said, maybe we didn't pay attention to it enough when we were younger, but holy crap, that song is unreal. Like, it is the way that it opens up. It's so epic, and there's to me there's so much more keyboards going on this album than in previous and it just kind of opens the door for Jens Johansson to join the band after this album is released. Because I mean, you listen, like you said, you listen to that instrumental track Stratovarius, and you'd think Jens was already in the band based on a track like that, because that's really it harkens back to when Jens was in, Yngwie Malmsteen's band, and it was that guitar keyboard just, back and forth. And that, I think this is the album where Stratovarius kind of becomes a band that's defined by keys and guitar.
Which makes them kind of unique, at least at the time, in terms of power metal, because Helloween wasn't doing that. Blind Guardian certainly wasn't doing that. Angra wasn't really doing that, whereas it becomes kind of a staple as part of their sound on virtually every song. And I'm happy that you mentioned the fact that Jens Johansson was not in the band at this time. We talked about Black Diamond earlier. A track like that is such a key part of their sound, with just the keyboard intro that Jens does on a track like that, or even other songs on Dream, on Destiny, and everything that's come after it. The one thing I would say is, even though there are touches of it, like in a song like Stratovarius, the one thing this album kind of lacked for me was Jens Johansson. And that's, I think, part of the reason why I always had held Episode and Visions in higher regard in terms of the second trilogy for Stratovarius. I've always enjoyed this album, and I think that the best songs on the album I would put up against any Stratovarius song. But conversely, I have to ding the album for a couple of reasons. A, I think it lacks Jens's both songwriting, solos, and kind of his standout performance. And number two, the album contains what I can only say is one of the worst songs ever written. And by that, I don't think it's any surprise. In fact, this particular track that I'm about to mention is so bad. And when I say bad, I mean so bad that I'm going to make a vow to you and everyone that's listening right now. I will never listen to this track again. I cannot get through it. The first time I listened to this disc this week, I actually had to skip it because I was about a minute into the song and I couldn't take it anymore. The next time I listened to the album, I forced myself. I forced myself to get through it, and that's when I decided to make this vow to you and everybody else. 030366 is probably the worst song ever written.
Happy birthday, Timo.
Yeah, if this was the payback for Anthrax, I apologize. Don't ever make me listen to that song again. And if they just took it out of the album, I would say the album is darn near perfect. Maybe not up to snuff with some of their other material, but certainly close. That song is god awful.
I'll tell you what, the one thing it does do is it makes you think Nightfall might be the greatest song you've ever heard.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that. That was the one song I don't think we've really talked about. I don't think it's a great song, but you're so happy to have. They were so smart to put probably the second worst song on the album immediately after the worst song ever made that it makes Nightfall seem like Holy Diver. I mean, it's like that. It's crazy, like absolutely insane to me. I don't particularly love Nightfall either. I think that's one of the other weaker tracks on the album. But when you compare the two, it's like night and day, no kidding. And I'll say this: they kind of got something going on here, almost like the new Secret Sphere album that I had mentioned earlier. You have tracks like Against the Wind and Distant Skies, which are pure power metal classic, tracks. You've got the neoclassical stuff with a song like Twilight Symphony, and then you listen to a song like Winter. Winter might as well be a doom metal track with just the slow plottingness of it. And I think it's perfectly fitting for the track and for where the band is from in Finland and everything. But to me, it's almost like a power metalized doom track. It's kind of weird, but it fits.
I really like Nightfall, and I think it's for that same reason, is that it's kind of a dreary kind of like almost like, yeah, I kind of get like your black metal reference there. Like, I like that this album isn't just a one note kind of sound. I mean 030366 is not a good song. I don't care for it either. It's a little something different, I guess, but I mean, it doesn't need to be here. By the way, for those who don't know, 3366 is Timo Tolkki's birthday, March 3rd, 1966, which I found out not too long ago. That does not make me like the song anymore.
It does. I mean, very interesting factoid. It does not redeem the song for me or anybody else.
Yeah, but,
listen, if I'm wrong, if there's somebody out there that listens to that track and tells me that it's one of their favorites, hit me up. I will. I'm just curious to see if there's anyone out there that likes.
We'll come to your house and slap you.
I mean, really.
But I think that Winter and Nightfall are like perfectly placed on the album because they kind of slow things down, because all the other songs are really quite speedy. Like Galaxies maybe is a little bit more mid tempo, but just the way that it's composed, it's really like anthemic, like almost like a triumphant march. That song I think is maybe one of the most underrated Stratovarius songs of all time. And one of the reasons why and I'm going to tell the story in a bit, but one of the reasons why I wanted to buy this album so badly, but I like that Nightfall kind of slows things down before We Hold the Key comes in with this bombastic opening and then there's a part towards the end of We Hold the Key where it's like the slow guitar part, and oh my God, it reminded me so much of Keeper era Halloween. It's like, it needs to be said, Timo Tolkki is an absolute wizard at the guitar, and he's on full display here. I will disagree with you about this album falling short of Episode or Visions because of Jens Johansson not being on it, because Jens Johansson doesn't actually write any songs on Episode or Vision, so I think really it's just him kind of adding his keyboard flair to some of the songs, but I think it's really Timo Tolkki's compositions that are on. I mean, I don't like.
I think that the
There's so
keyboard
few
solos, I think he gets the credit for, if I'm
Sure,
not
sure.
mistaken. And,
There's
and
just
that's
so
really
few.
what I'm.
There's so few songs like while Timo Tolkki was part of Stratovarius. There's so few songs that were not written by him. I mean, he was such a powerhouse songwriter, and then I would argue that he hit a complete wall. Somewhere around the Elements era, but that maybe is a conversation for later. But I mean, he right. If you talk about Fourth Dimension episode, Visions, Destiny, and even Infinite, I mean, this guy, he's just like churning out incredible song after incredible song. I mean, who has on their resume like such a streak of incredible songwriting? Like Timo Tolkki was just, and this is to me like the beginning of like the classic era of Stratovarius is really like Fourth Dimension through Destiny or even Infinite. Like it's just that mid to late 90s Stratovarius era was just so epic. Like it's really incredible, and this to me was the beginning of it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely think this is when he begins really hitting his stride as a songwriter, and even, quite frankly, even his guitar chops in certain ways are better on this album and continue to evolve, and he's just fantastic at what he does. And I agree with you. Album after album after album, all the way up through Infinite, are very good, if not better, at a bare minimum, some of which is some of the best power metal you will ever hear. And then I don't really quite understand what happens, but they come out, with the exception of the self-titled album, which I just literally I can't listen to because I just find it that impossible to get through. Everything else he's touched has been gold, but then I think he hit like this writer's block, and it's funny because he's penned a lot of albums since then under different monikers, his solo band and other things, and nothing had the staying power that an album like Fourth Dimension or Episode or Visions had with me. And I don't quite know why, because it's almost as if he went back to the well with the formula that he knew and kind of perfected. That's what I want to hear, and unfortunately, I think those days are just gone. But I look back on some of this stuff so fondly that it almost doesn't matter, because an album like Episode or an album like Visions, and this maybe one step down for me, but it's right there with some of the best Euro power metal that has ever been recorded.
So I'm looking through, and this is incredible to me. I didn't even think it was like this absurd how much songwriting credit goes to Timo Tolkki, but Timo Tolkki wrote from Fourth Dimension to Infinite, wrote every song except for 3. Not necessarily lyrics, but wrote the music, has songwriting credit for all but 3 songs. Jens Johansson wrote Glory of the World on Infinite. Timo Tolkki wrote all of Destiny, all of Visions, and Timo Kotipelto wrote Uncertainty on Episode. And
which is a great song in its own right.
And Tolkki wrote every song on this album, Fourth Dimension, as well.
Yeah, I didn't realize. I knew that he had his thumb all over this, and obviously he left the band on kind of unceremonious terms in and around 2006, 2007. What's almost amazing to me is that since then the band has recorded 4 albums, and they are all in this kind of style, even though he wasn't part of the band and obviously writing songs for them. Polaris, Elysium, Nemesis, Eternal, all those albums are kind of in this vein. And my personal favorite, Nemesis, kind of like my favorite of the new wave. Too. Yeah, that album could have been recorded after Destiny, and I don't think anybody would have known any better.
I think the fact that Jens stayed in the band and Timo Kotipelto remained the vocalist, and that they brought in somebody like, Lori Pora and is it Matthias Kopainen? I think that they were Stratovarius fans and they wanted to just continue making Stratovarius music. and I believe Jorg Michael stayed with the band for a good bit. I think he eventually retired a few years ago, and he would join the band after Fourth Dimension, and we'll go into that actually. Still, this is the last album to feature Antti Ikonen on keyboards and Tuomo Lassila, who was the drummer, and they were both founding members of Stratovarius. They were both on all of the albums up until this point, and they would leave the band because they didn't agree with the direction that Timo Tolkki was going in. And I mean, it reminds me of what's the guy who left the Beatles? Maybe not quite that epic, but I mean, like you don't like
comparison.
Yeah, you don't like a direction that Stratovarius is going. Oh, we'll see you later. And
it's also like when Neil Peart, was on Rush's second album and then never left the band, but I believe he wasn't on the first one, and I kind of feel sorry for that guy because
that guy who
nobody knows his name, right?
So. Jari Kainalainen, who is bass player for Master Plan nowadays, he had joined the band previously. He was on the Dream Space album, and he would continue on with the band through the 90s. And then after this album, Jens Johansson would come in as the new keyboard player, and Jorg Michael would come in as the new drummer. And that lineup stayed together for a few albums. I think other than Stratovarius' current lineup, it might be their most consistent lineup. And I think that the consistency of the albums themselves kind of lends to that. I did want to tell the story about being a kid and going out to Montauk for a few days during the summer. And Mike had come on the trip with me, and he had this CD before I did, and so I borrowed it from him, and I just remember listening to it on the beach, and I'll never forget hearing Galaxies for the first time and just being absolutely blown away by that song and thinking to myself, like, how do I not own this album?
It's funny because it's such a simple song, but it is so catchy and it sticks in your head forever because it's one of those things like I could instantaneously pick it out like right away. I can name that song in 2 notes. It is just so simple but so catchy.
Yeah, it's got Knops had texted me because he wanted to give the album a listen prior to us reviewing it, and he mentioned it too. He was like, I love how it has kind of like that 80s kind of keyboard vibe to it, and it probably sounds so dated nowadays, but like to me it's just such a fixture in my mind of such a great song that I absolutely love. And it takes me back to that time of being like 16, 17 years old. I mean, I feel like we've kind of put a spotlight on every track, good or bad. You had mentioned Lord of the Wasteland earlier. I think that is another song that is definitely underrated. Like you said, really good, like fast, speedy power metal. Again, We Hold the Key. Like, if you haven't listened to this album in a while, and Justin is going to post this because it's his track of the week, go back and listen to this song. It's so good. And Twilight Symphony is just like this really, like, to me, represents like the beginning. Like, this is where Jens Johansson's just going to fit in so perfectly,
and it's kind of well placed as like the last full length track on the album, and then Jens joins the band with the beginning of episode. It's kind of fitting in that regard, I think. Right?
Yeah. There's a short instrumental track called "Call the Wilderness" that ends the album. Just kind of puts a little bit of a bookend on the entire experience, but 030366 notwithstanding, this album is pretty darn fantastic.
Enough avoiding the question, what is your track of the week? I know that you haven't decided yet, and I'm sure that you could go in any number of directions, but pick one.
Yeah, I probably would have chosen We Hold the Key had you not, but rather than agree with you, being that it's a virtual tie for me, I'm just going to go with Galaxies as my track of the week. And honestly, like, spin the wheel, like any of these really are deserving of being track of the week, minus the one that we mentioned once or twice, but yeah, I mean, I think Galaxies just for me just has just a little bit of a step ahead of everything else just because of the nostalgia factor and just how catchy it is. And it's almost like you kind of can close your eyes and picture yourself like marching off, or maybe not marching off to war as much as like marching home from war. Like you already won the battle, and it's cool. I was noticing too that like we hold the key like lyrically you can see like Stratovarius. I think of a song like Paradise on the Visions album where it feels like they do sing quite a bit about the environment and nature and preserving nature and things of that nature.
That's kind of been a
nature, no
staple
pun
throughout.
intended.
Yeah, it's kind of been a staple throughout their whole career, really. I think they have a bunch of songs like that. I know for a fact that there are songs like, called Gaia that they obviously were writing about, certain things about the environment as well. And, it's songs, other songs on Infinite. This is not an uncommon thing for them. And I think that's, a nice change of pace from the, from some of the, the dragons and the bards that Blind Guardian are sometimes singing about. And that's one of the things I always appreciated about them. You look at a song like Forever, and it's, a fantastic ballad on the Episode album, but it's kind of simple, but well-placed lyrics, for a power metal band, I would say.
Yeah. The lyrics feel more serious and less like fanciful, I guess, or less fantasy oriented.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
I think that's kind of a nice draw as well. They almost feel like a more serious Finnish version of a Halloween or what have you. And I read an interesting thing too, that this is the last time Stratovarius would have an all Finnish lineup on an album, which I thought
I didn't realize that, but I guess that makes sense. Yeah,
because Jens is Swedish, so once he joins the band, and he's still in the band now,
that would be the end of that.
Yeah, but Timo Kotipelto is the only person on this album who is still in Stratovarius to this day.
And by the way, live, the guy sounds as good as he ever did, even though it's 26 years later, which is amazing considering some of the notes that he hits on this album.
Yeah. I also am reminded, I keep thinking of all these different talking points, but Timo Tolkki had talked about getting back together with Tuomo Lassila and Antti Ikonen to make re-recordings of some of the songs that they performed on these first 4 Stratovarius albums. And it doesn't look like, a lot of things that Timo Tolkki, says he wants to do sometimes don't always come to fruition.
Shout out to Miss K.
Exactly. So, I was excited about that when it was announced. I was like, oh, that could be really kind of cool. But it is what it is. Timo Tolkki, suffers from a lot of mental health issues, and I just wish him all the best and hope that he stays healthy. And I thought it was a pretty magnanimous thing for him to do, to basically give away his band to the remaining members and let them continue the Stratovarius name without being really petty about it and kind of like just hold it for ransom. And based on some of the stuff that he recorded, maybe the Stratovarius name would have been sullied a little bit had it just become a Timo Tolkki joint, if you will, for the next 20 years or however long it's been. So
yeah, I agree. I echo those sentiments. I want to ask one more question before we put a bow on this with our ratings. Is for an album that obviously you hold in your heart because of the nostalgia for many reasons and the fact that it's just a damn good album, is it better than you remember it? Is it not as good as you remember it? Or is it pretty much as awesome as you remembered it?
I would say it's better than I remember it because songs like Lord of the Wasteland and Nightfall and We Hold the Key are just so much better than I remember them being. And it's funny. I'll tell you something, and you could tell me if you feel similar. But this kind of popped into my head when I was listening to this week, and it's like I was thinking to myself that in this time where there's no iTunes and there's no like, there really is no like digital music, like we're buying CDs. I mean, these 11 songs were 11 of the maybe what, like 200, 300 songs that we had available to us at
Yeah.
any given time. So
Yeah.
like, I think it was easier to cast aside the songs that weren't as memorable back then because, there was only so much to listen to. So, a song like Against the Wind, I think has so much more, just it hits you so much harder because there's less songs to listen to. And as time goes on, you remember those songs that really hit you, like Distant Skies and Against the Wind and Galaxies and Twilight Symphony. And you kind of, songs like these, like songs that fill out the rest of the album, they kind of fall by the wayside in your mind. And you go back and you listen to them again. And same thing happened to me when we listened to the Within Temptation album, Mother Earth. It's kind of like you remember Mother Earth and Ice Queen and Deceiver of Fools, and you forget about Dark Wings and The Promise and all that. And the same with this. So yeah, that's a kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but I think that, I mean, I remember never liking 030366, so that kind of stayed the same. But Winter, Lord of the Wasteland, Nightfall, We Hold the Key, those are like 4 tracks where I was like, damn, like these songs are almost as good, if not as good as everything else on this album.
Yeah, that the classic stuff really I enjoyed just as much, but it was kind of those mid card songs that really I think I appreciated a lot more this time, and I probably liked the album more as a result. I'll just say one last thing. I think the cover art is terrible, but that's neither here nor there. I'll give them a pass. I'm happy they changed the logo, and I don't know what the floating pyramids are, but whatever. More power to you. The songs are good, and that's all that matters. What do you rate the album on a scale of 1 to 10?
Well, honestly, I feel like a 9.5 is too high, but a 9.0 is too low. So I'm going to give it a 9.25. I feel like, honestly, 030366 knocks it down a peg. And I don't think it would have been a perfect album even without 030366, but it's damn good. And it might be my favorite Stratovarius album. It depends on the day you ask, I guess. But I think I can safely give it a 9.25 and be pretty happy with that. How about you?
Nice. I kind of went back and forth with this. I think it's somewhere between an 8.5 and a 9. I'm probably going to give it an 8.5, but it's the reason I give it the 8.5 and not the 9 is just because, again, I know what's about to come. And I think it's hard for me to say that 3 albums in a row are better, but they are, in my opinion. I enjoy the next 3 albums just a little bit more. I think it's just a little bit more polished, and I think the songwriting is just a touch better. And I wouldn't say that they're all 10s. I don't think Destiny is a 10, but it's that to me might be a 9. So that's why I'm going to give this a strong 8.5.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. I almost feel like, in retrospect, like I might have wanted to actually like listen to Episode and Visions and Destiny, and it's just, oh my god, these songs, these albums are just so good. Like,
and they hold up too, which I think is the key. But you know what? You talked about wanting to listen to some other albums. Why don't we set the table for what we have going on in the next 2 weeks? I have an album, or I should say I have 2 albums picked out for next week. I'm still oscillating between the 2. So before I pick next week's album, why don't you give everyone a heads up as to what we're doing for the April 5th show, the first week of April, by request?
Oh yeah, I am super pumped about this, and this was something that I kind of threw to you a couple of weeks ago, and you thought it was a good idea, and what kind of brought it about was that two friends of ours who both listen to the show regularly, and big shout outs to Nick and Amy, love you guys. They had both mentioned a band, and a band that I knew we would definitely get to, and the funny thing is that they chose different albums, and rather than choose one over the other, I thought, being that the band doesn't have a huge library, I thought it would be a good chance to for our first time to kind of do like a deep dive into the history of this band, talk about all of their releases, of which there are 6, and just kind of kind of tell their story and give some anecdotes about our fandom and how we feel about the 6 albums. And that band is the Pennsylvania-based prog metal band Shadow Gallery, and they're maybe not the most popular or well-known band of a lot of the bands that we've talked about, but I mean, I'm a huge fan. I think that they're phenomenal. When I started to get Amy into more metal, like, they were one of the first bands that she actually glommed onto, which is surprising because she's not the biggest prog metal fan in the world.
They're
but
so accessible, and I think that one of the things we'll get into is I don't even really consider them, having gone back and listened to some of this stuff, a lot of their stuff isn't even metal. It's more of like, kind of 70s prog rock with like a real Kansas vibe to it. But the hooks that they write with some of these songs, the hooks just make the songs pop for you. But again, that's a story for another day. I look forward to that immensely. And I also thought it was ironic that we got 2 requests for such a kind of obscure band. And then I think it was a great idea to just put it all together and kind of do a career retrospective episode, which is obviously what we'll be doing the first week in April. So I look forward to that. I should also note we've gotten a ton of requests as of late, and keep them coming. We appreciate that. And we may even wind up doing 2 a month at some point just to catch up with the backlog. But we have a list going. And we will get.
If you leave us a good review, we might push your choice up the pecking order.
Also a very good point. So keep that coming because it helps other people find the show. But before we get to Shadow Gallery in 2 weeks, we have next week's show. And as I said, I had debated between 2 albums, and I'm actually
I want you to know that I'm starting to get scared of your announcement.
No, we're going to do things a little bit differently this week. And I haven't even told you that this is what we're going to do, but I have 2 albums that are both interesting in their own way, but I want to let you decide. So I'm going to let you pick from these 2. And admittedly, we'll probably get to the other one at some point. My first instinct was to go back to 1987 because I struck out so badly the last time. And I wanted to do something a little bit different. And I wanted to go with one of my absolute favorite hair metal bands. And I wanted to do Dokken's Back for the Attack, of which I don't think you've heard the album, but I think you will recognize at least 1 or 2 songs off of it, including Kiss of Death, which Van Den Plas had covered. That was option 1. And then option 2 was more of a timely release because we're celebrating the 20th anniversary this month of Ark's Burn the Sun, which is one of my all-time favorite prog metal discs, featuring Jorn Land and a whole slew of other all-stars. But I'll let you choose. Do you have a preference for next week?
Oh, that's kind of a tough call, actually, because I'm more familiar with the Ark album, but the songs that I do know from the Dokken album I really like. Let's do Dokken.
I love it. Let's do that. I have a feeling that Jorn is going to get his own episode at some point. And at some point, we definitely will do some Ark because I just happen to think they may be the most underrated band of all time. But next week we'll come back for the attack with some Dokken, which is a nice change of pace, and hopefully I can redeem myself and the 1987 crowd.
Yeah, I mean, you might have needed to ask for Keeper Part 1 to get your cred back with me, but it's so weird. You know that feeling you get like you forgot something. Like I know I just yammered on a ton about Fourth Dimension, and I just can't. I feel like there's more to talk about. I'm sure there's not, but I mean, I just, oh my god, I'm glad that it popped up. So shout out to Mike Johnson for just sharing Stratovarius's post and just kind of getting the gears turning in my head. It was I only listened to the album twice this week. It was all I really needed to hear to just remind me of how much I like this. So yeah, I just it's almost like I'm sad that we have to stop talking about it.
Well, if anything comes to you, obviously we can open up next week with it. And I have a feeling, like I said, it's not the end of Stratovarius. It's just the beginning. So great choice. Thank you for choosing it, and I look forward to doing some docking next week. So with that, we'll put a bow on it. We hope you enjoyed this week, and we'll be back next week with some docking.
All right, sounds good, buddy.
Take it easy.
All right, take care.